Give me a second. All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and here we go. So we were actually talking about last time the conditions of salah, and we talked about some of the conditions, and in particular, of course, the time or the class that was before this one, we were talking about the timing. And we went in details, a lot of details about the timing, but then last class we were talking about satr al-awra. We were talking about concealing one's aura, concealing one's private parts. But of course, what is a private part? Well, in the English language, when we say private part, we're actually talking about more the genitalia. But in Islam, the men's private area that is to be covered is different than the women's private area. So to make the story short, in Islam, of course, there is something called a major aura. العورة المغلظة, and there is a minor aura. Okay, so when we say العورة المغلظة or the major aura, we're specifically, I guess, agreeing with the English language here, talking about the genitalia and that private area, that private part. But when we're speaking about minor aura, we're speaking about the other areas that you would cover, perhaps the thighs. We're talking about maybe other areas. If we're talking about a man, the aura or that private area is going to be from the belly button to the knee. But it's important to mention when we're speaking about the knee, are we literally talking about the knee or are we including the knee? Is it not included? So what about, I guess, little shorter, or let me say shorter shorts, a little above the knee? Well, what if it's a little even more above the knee? Where is that parameter that is considered as aura for the men? That's a differences of opinions between scholars, okay? Just keep that one in mind. Just whenever I would say something is different opinions between scholars, I just want you to be aware of those parameters. That way you can be, I would say, inclusive from one angle to the different opinions between scholars. And number two, to be aware of such areas in order to help you understand the limitations. Okay, so that's one thing. For women, then they had the differences of opinions. They all agreed that a woman is awra, but what does that really mean? What does it mean that a woman and everything about a woman is awra? Does that include her voice? Does that include her face and hands? Does that include the feet? Does that include that the woman herself is aura, that she's not supposed to be present in public whatsoever, not in her voice, not on her YouTube, not on YouTube, not even if she's dressed. In fact, even her name is aura. Okay. So you had this very extreme, quote unquote, okay, this extreme group that considered, well, when we say a woman is aura, her name is supposed to be concealed, her voice, everything about her is to be basically something that is hidden. Okay. On the other hand, you had the other group that considered that no, when we say a woman is awra, that doesn't necessarily mean that everything about her is to be covered. And then therefore, they would look into these limitations and interpret the limitations. Let me give you an example, for example. Let me give you an example in regards to voice, for example. When we look at the ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was really clear about a woman's voice and said, was in Surah Al-Ahzab, of course, in Surah Al-Ahzab, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was really straightforward and was telling the women not to speak in lenient voices, okay? But used one word, okay? It was فَلَا تَخْضَعْنَ بِالْقَوْلِ and it was really straightforward. And then it continued, فَيَطْمَعَ الَّذِي فِي قَلْبِهِ مَرَضٌ. Okay. So الخضوع بالقول is being lenient in the voices or expanding conversations with men. Okay, that's الخضوع بالقول. Expanding conversations with men, chatting with men, or even being lenient in the voice, trying to use a flirtatious voice with men, or chatting, or just talking about, I don't know, about our day and what we've been doing and how I wanted to buy whatever it is, and basically going into these kind of conversations. That's الخضوع بالقول. But then the ayah continues, وَقُلْنَا قَوْلًا مَعْرُوفًا, and say what is good. Now, what is the limit of what is good? Is a fiqh class that I'm giving necessarily part of وَقُلْنَا قَوْلًا مَعْرُوفًا? Or is it that no, قُلْنَا قَوْلًا مَعْرُوفًا, this is if there is a necessity for you to speak what is good, then make sure you say it in a good way and in a specific, let's call it summarized way. That way you're not expanding the talk, etc. So that way, فَيَطْمَعَ الَّذِي فِي قَلْبِهِ مَرَضٌ, because you will have some men that will have some diseases in their hearts. We're not talking about a disease, some kind of a stroke or some kind of a cardiovascular issue. No, we're actually talking about spiritual diseases in the heart. Okay, so when you look at this as an example, just wanted to use this I guess case, because when you see the text itself, okay, you see the text itself within one text, pretty precise, you would assume, but then despite the specification and how, of course, the wordings were pretty precise, but then they still would get into the differences of opinions because the words themselves can still contain ambiguity in understanding the limitations, in understanding the parameter of all these questions that might actually come to the surface. Okay, same thing when we're speaking about, is a woman awra? How do we understand that description? How do we put it into practice? Are we talking about the voice? Are we talking about her itself? Are we talking about her name? Are we talking about the feet? Are we talking about that she cannot be present in public? And even if we are to talk about her presentation in public, I'm not necessarily talking about a presentation to mean she's standing in front of a crowd and giving a lecture there, but I'm talking about, well, how she appears in public in general. Okay, so those are some of the areas. But then when it comes to salah, I guess it's a little more specific than in public, because in salah, we're just assuming a situation where there are no mahram men present. So the issue of perhaps people having marad in their hearts, maybe diseases in their hearts, maybe men getting, I guess, let's say, not understanding, let's call it this way, not understanding their boundaries with a woman, etc. All of that is not present, but still, despite the fact that all of this is not present, but a woman during salah, even if there are no men, she's still asked to cover in a specific way, which actually gives us an indication that when we speak of hijab, hijab is not only because of men. So, the feminists would want to present that, hey, if men can't control their drives, then why am I the one wearing hijab to help them control their drives? Actually, that's not the case. Hijab is not only to prevent men's drives from getting off track, but it's also to help women direct their drives as well towards a spiritual identity, a spiritual track as well. What's the evidence? The evidence is when she is in salah, even if no man is present, even if she is completely alone, she's asked to dress in a certain way. Why? There's no one there but her and the angels and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right. Because the object of covering is not only the man. The object of covering is for her spirituality as well. Remember how the Prophet ﷺ was directing that Sahabi when he said, well, what if I'm alone? And he said, Allahu ahaqqu an yustahya min. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is more important, is at a priority, is a higher priority to consider bashfulness with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than people. So when we're speaking about even if you're alone, even if the whole idea of, let's say, inappropriate reaction, inappropriate behavior is not at all present, but still, that is to indicate that modesty is more than how others see you, but it's also how you see yourself. How you see yourself in terms of identity, how you see yourself in terms of spirituality. In other words, you're looking at uncovering, even if you are alone, it doesn't just, let's say, influence the others that are watching you, but it also influences you and your relationship with your identity, your relationship with yourself, your relationship with your spirituality. Just keep that one in mind, okay? And this is very common that sisters might actually get confused in relationship to understanding hijab and thinking that, well, we're doing it for the sake of guys. If only guys would learn how to lower their gaze, we wouldn't have to get into this trouble. Not quite. That's not necessarily just guys related. Just keep that one in mind. Okay. The other part I wanted to go in further details about is the facial covering. I know that when we speak about the face, wanted to say a couple things. Number one is that there are differences of opinions between scholars on the perimeter, on, let's say, the border of women's awrah. So just like when we talked about that particular text about a woman's voice, well, the debate grows stronger when we're speaking about the face covering, and there are a number of reasons to why the debate grows stronger. Number one is that they had differences of opinions on the ayat, whether that hijab and covering everything about women, whether that was exclusive to the Prophet ﷺ's wives. I'm not talking about the hijab, meaning the covering of a woman, okay? That general hijab. I'm talking about the facial covering right now. Is this exclusive to the Prophet ﷺ's wives or not? Or is that ayah supposed to be, yes, it's directed at the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, but it is in order for the other women to take it as a legacy, as a role model for themselves as well. Okay, so just keep that one in mind. But you had the majority of the scholars, they based on the practice that in general, the women in the Muslim world, in the Muslim, let's at least, be specific, during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, they did cover their faces. Okay, but did they cover their faces because that was mandatory, or did they cover their faces because they wanted to mimic the wives of the Prophet ﷺ? Okay, that was that other debate. Now, when you see the ahadith do contain some different opinions in how we interpret it. I'll give you an example. You have one hadith where the Prophet ﷺ was talking to this lady, and al-Fadl ibn Abbas was present with the Prophet ﷺ, young man, but he just kept on staring at the girl that was with this older woman, and the Prophet ﷺ would keep turning his face. Okay. You could see from this event, this is one of those evidences that both parties, and in fact, both parties, the group that said that a woman is supposed to be covering her face, and the other group that said that it's not mandatory, but it is sunnah, or it is an extra credit, okay? They use the same evidence, the exact same evidence. Let's look at this one. This interpretation, you've got this hadith, al-Fadl ibn al-Abbas was continuously looking at this young woman who was coming along with her own mother, and the Prophet ﷺ would keep turning his face away because he was, I guess the girl was just so beautiful that he was continuously staring at this girl, and the Prophet ﷺ would just keep on turning his face, and he would keep on, the Prophet ﷺ would turn his face, but he would turn his face back at the girl, just staring at her. Okay, a couple times. Okay. Now, you could see group one said, well, if uncovering the face was not permissible, then why didn't the Prophet ﷺ direct that woman to basically cover her face? And we would know that the Prophet ﷺ was basically directed whenever there is al-haja ila al-bayan, whenever there was a need for clarity, that the Prophet ﷺ was going to be doing that clarification. Okay. The second group that defended that, no, that's not an evidence that you could use because we've got another interpretation, another explanation for this. They said, well, in fact, him turning his face is the evidence that supports our argument because he wouldn't have turned his face unless it was not permissible to look at it. Okay, look at the different way of interpreting it. And plus, you don't have an evidence that when he turned his face, or at least the story and the chronology of that story, and when was it really revealed, or when did it happen? Not revealed per se, but when did it happen? Did it happen before hijab was ordered and basically made as a mandation, or is it after? Wait a minute, let's look at the context. Well, when was hijab mandated anyways? Hijab was not mandated until almost 18 years from the birth of Islam. Okay, you know what that means? So when we're speaking about the Prophet ﷺ becoming a prophet, okay, that was when he was 40 years old. Okay, he stayed in Mecca 12 years and 9 months. Okay, different opinions between scholars. Okay, 12 years, let's just say 13. Okay, and then he moved to Medina and stayed in Medina for 11 years. Okay, so we're actually talking about 13 plus 5. So we're speaking about within the time frame of 5 years, pretty much after migrating to Medina. Okay. And certainly, I mean, yes, you were the event during the Hajj, women should not wear a niqab. That's another evidence that they used. When we speak that a woman's ihram is by uncovering her face, and then you would have a Sayyidah Aisha that she was looking and basically at Hajj, during Hajj, whenever there would be these men passing by, they would somehow, have this veil, but it wasn't like a niqab per se. It was more coming from the top, and then they would just take it down and let it just basically basically cover from their heads down. So the first group, they said, well, it makes no sense to say that when a woman goes for Hajj, that she would be committing a sin. if we are going to be saying that covering the face is obligatory, why would she be ordered to commit a sin if she is going to Hajj? It makes no sense. Well, the second group of scholars, they said she's not committing a sin because a sin would be something that is against the text. And we have a text that says that there's an exception during Hajj that she would uncover her face and that was her way of ihram. So that was their evidence. They said, well, let's understand the wording. We didn't say it's a sin to uncover the face in Hajj because we've got the evidence to prove that it is an exception. But we do have evidence, that's the second opinion, their argument. We do have an evidence to consider that uncovering the face outside of Hajj is a sin. That's their evidence. The first group responded and they said, well, you don't have an evidence that it's a sin because we don't necessarily have a wording or an obligation to prove that it's obligatory. That was just a general practice that they had practiced, but not necessarily that it is a sin. And then, of course, I'm just giving you a taste of that debate. The first group of scholars saying that it's a sin to uncover the face, the second group of scholars considering it as a sin. And of course, the debate is not, there's not going to come a time when we will say, okay, here we go. We had right now finally managed to finalize the debate. And now we can say the final answer is you have to cover the face or you can uncover the face. Okay. There's not going to come a time when this is going to happen. It's impossible. Why? Because we vary in the way we interpret the text. In fact, al-Albani himself, okay, al-Albani himself, he actually wrote this. I would consider it a huge book for a topic like this. And hijab al-mar'a al-muslima, it's almost in what, almost 230 pages just to talk about, is a woman's face awra or not? That's that question, okay? And then even though in conclusion, he had come to, I guess, to his final study in hadith and in studying this debate, he said, well, it's a sunnah. In other words, it's recommended to cover the face. But then his daughters and his wife was actually covered. They covered their faces. Okay. This is just some of that debate and how we understand that this debate, it's a valid opinion, but then, okay, what I consider recommended, how do I apply it? And those that would want to say that it's obligatory and they would insist that it's obligatory, and here's our evidence, I would like to say that there are those evidences in Quran and Sunnah that can have multiple interpretations. That's all I want to say. Okay, multiple interpretations, and we can read them differently, and therefore just recognize the fiqh behind this. That's what I care about mainly. Recognize the fiqh behind it, and by recognizing fiqh, you're expanding your understanding of the text. The text itself is there. There's no changing going to be happening. No change going to be happening to the text. But there are multiple interpretations, and we're talking about the valid interpretations. I'm not talking about an interpretation that someone's making up, like shahrur or whatever it is. No, in order to understand the text, you're going back to one, understanding the Quran and the Sunnah and sticking to these two. and then you're using the different texts that the scholars had basically done their effort to help you understand the different evidences to support a certain interpretation. You're not making up your own interpretation to suit your, I guess, modern interpretation, because as much as you would want to say that it's unbiased, you definitely will have, at the end of the day, a biased influence, because one, you are definitely farther away, not only from history of the time of the Prophet ﷺ, but you're also farther than the knowledge that the scholars before us basically had in Quran, in qira'at, in tafsir, in sunnah, in understanding Islam, in, let's say, in the foundational piece of it. Okay, just wanted to note that one. Definitely, this is a longer debate, but I'm just trying to summarize it as much as I can. And with that summary, trying to, I guess, give you a taste of this debate, but there's really a lot more to it. Okay, so just wanted to mention that one. In terms of salah, we did talk about last time if the feet are awra or not. Okay, and we said just by إذا كان الدرع سابغا يغطي ظهور قدميها, just by looking at that text, we could see, we talked about how there were different interpretations to what really is that dhahr, what really is the back of a foot. Is it considered the bottom part? Is it considered the upper part? Is it considered ظهور قدميه? Does that mean that the actual foot itself is covered, or are we talking about up to the ankle? Okay, does that mean we can wear sandals? That's also included in that one. Are the awras within salah related to the awras outside of salah? Yes and no. Okay, yes and no. So how yes and no? So it would be a yes because it gives me certain details that I would derive from the awra outside of salah. But it is also a no because, yes, I would get some of the inspiration outside of salah and how she could dress outside of salah, but at the same time, the conditions outside in front of non-mahram, I would say, are more strict compared to the parameters and the regulations of awra for salah. Okay, so let's give an example. When we're speaking about awra in front of non-mahrams, we're going to be taking in consideration reducing attraction, reducing I guess different things that might bring, let's say, men and draw men, etc. So, but in salah, for example, can she have perfume on and pray with perfume on? Yes, she can, if non-mahram men are present. Okay. Number two, in public, when non-mahram men are present, she's not going to be wearing flashy things and anklets and these sounds of all of that in order to bring attraction. Okay. But during salah, can she actually have an anklet on in probably flashy colors, beautiful Pakistani clothes, all the flashy colors and all of those, mirrors that they sometimes would put on their garments, etc. Can you actually wear that during salah if non-mahram men are present? Yes, you can. Okay. But during salah, can you wear sheer clothing? During salah, non-mahram men are not present, but can you wear sheer clothing? The answer is no. Even though it's not to bring attraction, but that's because it comes from the definition of satr. The word satr basically means to cover. So if you're wearing sheer clothing, I don't know, like kind of some like a lingerie, for example, and it's a sheer thing, that would not be something that you could pray with, because it's not coming from the definition of satr and covering. So if it's not covered, whether it's see-through, sheer, whatever, okay, then in that situation, it's not covering. But what about if we're talking about she's wearing something that is, let's say, very, the different types of women's garments at home, they can be covering, but of course it's really thin clothing, really thin fabric, okay, really, or those glowy. I'm not really good at naming the types of fabrics. In Arabic, I think they call it satin or something. It's the really light fabric. Okay, it's glowy, shiny, etc. The kind they would use for night clothes and all of that. In that situation, can she pray? If she's covering all her body, but she's wearing something like that, the answer is yes. But can she wear something like that in public? The answer is no. Okay. Can she wear something like that if she's in public? Oh, see through, there's no difference of opinions that she cannot wear something see-through and pray with it. Okay? There's no differences of opinions on that. Okay? Okay. Let's move on right here with some of the different ولا يبدين زينتهن إلا ما ظهر منها وليضربن بخمرهن على جيوبهن ولا يبدين زينتهن إلا لبعولتهن. So what we did actually go in details or some details with this with these ayat and said that they should not reveal their beautification. And in terms of, well, how do we understand it? What is the definition of not revealing beautification? Is beautification the acquired beautification? So we're talking about maybe putting jewelry on, or are we talking about, no, if this isn't necessarily the small amount of beautification. لا يبدين زينتهن إلا ما ظهر منها, except what normally appears. Now, this is that area of ambiguity because if it were to say ولا يبدين زينتهن, no beautification is supposed to be appearing. But then it put in and annexed as a parenthetical clause, okay, in parentheses right there, إلا ما ظهر منها as an exception, except what normally appears. What does normally appear? So you had some scholars like, in fact, well, he's a Sahabi, Abdullah ibn Abbas, who actually said, well, this is talking about something like the eyeliner or kuhl in the eyes, or perhaps maybe bracelets, or maybe a ring, or maybe the mendi, the henna on the hands and so forth, and said, well, this is ma dhahara minha. So you had that interpretation. The other interpretation, they said, no, that's beautification. And therefore, إلا ما ظهر منها is to be specific. ما ظهر منها meaning if it's not acquired beautification. In other words, it's plain face, plain hands, nothing bare on them. Okay. In other words, she doesn't have any beautification on them whatsoever. And ما ظهر منها, that would be, in other words, her biological, I guess, beauty with nothing on it. No beautification on it. We're speaking about the areas of face at least, and we're speaking about the hands. Okay. Or إلا ما ظهر منها to mean perhaps some ornaments maybe on the garment itself. So perhaps she's wearing, let's say, a abaya, and on the abaya there's some embroidery on certain areas, or maybe a small amount of embroidery maybe on the sleeve, a small amount of embroidery maybe in front, not overly, but just an amount. Okay. Then we go into, okay, well, who's going to determine if this is too much or whether this is not too much? Too much embroidery, too much, I guess, beautification on it. Who's going to determine? That's your taqwa to determine. Okay, that's your taqwa to determine. Is this too much or is this not too much? What is the determination going to be based off of? The determination is going to be based off one, trying to get to an objective answer. Two, you're going to take in consideration the culture, العرف. Why? Because when you take in consideration the urf and the culture, this becomes an area uh, that we would make sure that we are not standing out. And people, when they get accustomed to something, okay, it doesn't attract them when they get accustomed to something. Okay. And then when somebody stands out with a different attire, like let's say, for example, you go to Afghanistan, okay, perhaps, okay, and you wear the black niqab and black abaya, kind of like the Saudi, you're going to definitely be standing out. Okay. But if perhaps we had the Afghani burqa, okay, and wearing that in Saudi Arabia, you're going to be standing out in Saudi Arabia. It's going to be completely different. They're not accustomed to it. So we will take in consideration the attire that women or men are actually wearing within that culture. So إلا ما ظهر منها, first interpretation, this is speaking about the face and the hands, that this is an exception, and therefore they إلا ما ظهر منها would be considering that it's permissible to uncover the face and the hands. إلا ما ظهر منها, that no, this isn't talking about the face and hands, but this is talking about acquired beautification, whether you putting in some beautification or basically enhancing it. Okay. The third interpretation. Now, some of that acquired beautification is permissible, like a little bit of foundation, a little bit of makeup, a little bit of probably, some jewelry. Some scholars actually said, well, this is إلا ما ظهر منها. It's not exaggerated, just a little bit. And at the end, she has to use her fair judgment. And of course, that I have a problem with this one, because if we're saying her fair judgment, and especially during our times, we could see that shaitan gets into this small area of what is called a fair judgment, and then shaitan manages to sneak in that gap, and then, of course, the fitna comes from there. So you would have women, for example, wearing niqab, but then, yeah, their eyes are appearing, but then they'll make their eyes appear in the most attractive way. And if we are to say, well, yeah, I'll let you determine, I'll let you judge, we'll definitely have to work on religious integrity, but just wanted uh, exactly. So what about color contacts? Okay, this is another thing. Okay, is that permissible or is that not permissible? Is the color contact fitting within that parenthetical clause? Okay, إلا ما ظهر منها, or is that no, you are putting some beautification on there. You wore the contact lenses, or at least those colored contacts, and you put on foundation, you put on some makeup. It's in order to show beautification, it's in order to bring attraction. Then therefore, this is basically coming with that interpretation that no, إلا ما ظهر منها, the preponderant, wallahu a'lam, is that إلا ما ظهر منها is speaking of something that is not acquired. In other words, you're basically plain and not adding any beautification, any cosmetics. Okay. But there's a difference between, for example, sunscreen lotion, and that's to prevent, let's say, your aging and all of that. Okay. And between putting things like foundation in order to somehow, cover the pores and cover certain things. But there's a difference between covering perhaps an area that has a deformity. Okay. Deformity, maybe she's got this huge birthmark on her face and she wants to cover the birthmark. Certainly, we would just recommend, don't let that birthmark be something that would take away your confidence. But let's just say she's just taking the stares on that people would give her. So can she put something that is covering the birthmark? Because this would be a deformity in that situation. Okay, then this would be different than speaking about the other women when we're telling them do not put makeup or any acquired cosmetics, because that's enhancing beautification, enhancing it to draw attention basically in that situation. So just wanted to note that one, okay? Just help you see this debate, and all those opinions are considerable opinions. This is extremely important to keep in mind. All those opinions are considerable opinions, and they're not modern opinions that were Western influenced or whatever it is now. Those were way before the West even existed. They had these differences of opinions way before the West even existed. Okay. يا أيها النبي قل لأزواجك وبناتك ونسائك وبناتك ونساء المؤمنين يدنين عليهن من جلابيبهن. And tell your wives, O Prophet, tell your wives, your daughters, and the believing women. يدنين عليهن من جلابيبهن. الإدناء would be to let things loose. Okay. So not tightening the clothes and not somehow wearing, we're seeing right now, many would wear a hijab, basically covering their head, but then she's probably wearing yoga pants that are really tight on her body and with the hijab. That's not a hijab at all, because a hijab is not supposed to be shaping the body. Okay, the hijab is not supposed to be shaping the body. The hijab, or the covering, at least, let's not use the word hijab. Okay, so the covering of the body, the ayah was actually saying yudnina alayhinna min jalabibihin, that they should basically cover with their jilbab. What is a jilbab? A jilbab is going to be something that is a garment that covers the body. It covers the body, and the Prophet ﷺ did explain covering the body. We're speaking about covering the body from head to toe. But where did we get the head to toe piece of it? Remember that hadith that we talked about, that when he was asked if a woman can pray with dir'a khimar, and the Prophet ﷺ said, إذا كان درع سابغا يغطي ظهور قدميها. It would be permissible if it was covering basically the feet. Okay, let's continue right there. وإذا سألتموهن متاعا فاسألوهن من وراء حجاب. If you ask them for any goods, or in other words, there was a reason to it, then you would have to ask them من وراء حجاب. ذلكم أطهر لقلوبكم وقلوبهم. So this ayah, you could see, was exclusive really to the wives of the Prophet ﷺ. If you were to talk to them, they needed to talk to them behind a hijab. Okay. Now here's the confusion that oftentimes happens. People would say, or some women would come forward and say, well, hijab is not obligatory. Why? And they would say, well, look, here's the word hijab. And if you look at this ayah was directed at the Prophet ﷺ's wives. I would say, fair enough, but guess what? When people later use the word hijab to mean covering, that's not what Islam was talking about, or the Quran was talking about. So you're using the word wrong and applying it to the wrong thing and referring to the wrong thing. The word hijab was actually referred to having a barrier between the wives of the Prophet ﷺ and the men that are coming to talk to them. Okay. But later on, the covering of Muslim women was given a different name than اللباس الشرعي, than what is considered as the permissible garment, and the word hijab was given in replacement. Okay. Now that doesn't mean that اللباس الشرعي, or that a woman's covering in itself, is not mandatory on Muslim women, because the hijab rule was not mandatory on Muslim women. Am I clear here? Let's do it again. The hijab to mean a wall barrier, that was only mandatory on the wives of the Prophet ﷺ. But the garment and covering the body from head to toe was mandated, not exclusive to the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, but it was mandated to all the Muslim women. Okay, now that's why the ayah said, Ya ayyuhan nabi, O Prophet of Allah, tell your wives, your daughters, and the believing women that they should cover with their jalabib. Okay, that they should cover with their jalabib. So therefore, if I were to use a better word for what today is known as hijab, I would rather use jilbab than hijab. Okay, but should I say I don't want to use hijab and all of that? I mean, no, I'll use hijab. So this is what today in our modern times, this is what is known in regards, and what this is what is referred to Muslim women's attire. I'll use the word hijab. That's okay. You can use the word hijab, but I just want you to understand, if you're going back to the Quran and you're like, hey, look, the word hijab is referring to the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, therefore hijab is not obligatory. I said, oh, you misunderstood this. Because the ayah says, يا أيها النبي قل لأزواجك وبناتك ونساء المؤمنين ونساء المؤمنين يدنين عليهن من جلابيبهن. Now the ayah is pretty clear about that. No, it was giving a direct order that the Muslim women should be covering their body with a jilbab, and then of course that it basically has certain conditions. Okay, just understanding and clarifying the terms, because this is very often that people would use the wrong term in the wrong context and come up with the wrong conclusion. Okay, let's see. Sayyidah Aisha, when she was in a state of ihram, she said, فَإِذَا مَرَّ بِنَا الرِّجَالُ سَدَلَتْ إِحْدَانَا خِمَارَهَا عَلَى وَجْهِهَا فَإِذَا جَاوَزُونَا كَشَفْنَا. She said, we were with the Prophet ﷺ in a state of ihram, which is the state when a person's going for Hajj or Umrah. They dress a certain way. They would have to pass by certain designated areas. They would make the sunnah there. They would make the intention there, and the intention is uttered. So it's not, I'm just passing by and I'm just staying quiet about it. No. There's a certain uttering, there's a certain way of announcing your intention, labbaika umrah or labbaika hajj. Okay. And if you expected that a period might be obstructing your hajj or your umrah, we would basically add to it just a small part, محلي حيث حبستني. Let me write that down. محلي حيث حبستني. محلي حيث حبستني. Meaning that my ihram will be over from the area that was basically beyond my capacity. Okay, محلي حيث حبستني. Okay, so this is just a small area. يا بني آدم خذوا زينتكم عند كل مسجد. Oh, children of Adam, every time you would go to the masjid, خذوا زينتكم هناك. Make sure you put on your best garments. So now it's talking about zina, whether we're speaking about best garments or whether we're speaking about zina to mean modesty. Zina to mean modesty. Okay, before we go on to the third condition, avoiding najasa and stuff, any questions in regards to what I had been saying?
يا السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام.
أيوة شيخة. I'm wondering about some sisters when they come, for example, to a house and they want to pray. They ask, and they have trousers and long blouse, but they ask for skirt.
Okay.
So you said at the beginning that it's not for the men, but it's for spiritual.
Right. So,
Even it's supposed to be
right,
to cover their beauty in the street, right?
right. So for salah, they still had those parameters if something's not supposed to be shaping the body, because is that part of a satr or not? Let's give an example. Let's say she's wearing yoga pants and she wants to pray with those yoga pants. Is her body technically covered by wearing yoga pants?
No.
Okay. The first opinion, yes, it's covered.
Oh,
She's wearing
it,
yoga pants and it's covered. The second opinion, no, it's not covered. Why not? They said, well, if you're literally shaping the body, a covering would mean something is covered and I don't identify what's underneath it. That's what a covering means. So the first opinion said, well, is it covered? It is. Is it showing what's underneath?
yeah,
You can't see the actual leg, but you can
form.
see the shape,
Yeah,
certainly. Is the shape not included or is it included? Okay. Because the hadith, when the Prophet ﷺ was telling that Sahabi, so let me tell you the story. The Sahabi would go to the masjid and then he would be a little bit late and basically leave the masjid and stay somewhere else. And then his wife would come to the masjid. The Prophet ﷺ was actually surprised. So why aren't you completing your salah? And why is your wife coming and not you? And he said, well, we both share only one garment.
Allah.
That's all. So the Prophet ﷺ told him that would be fine if he tells him, let her wear something underneath it. Why? Because I want to make sure that it's not revealing the size of her bones. Okay. So then the scholars would have differences of opinions. Is that exclusive? Did he say it because the lady was going to salah? Or did he say it because the lady was going to be in a public place? So therefore, when I'm at home praying alone, can I pray with my yoga pants or tights and hijab? I'm covering my head, etc. Okay. Or do I have to wear a skirt? Okay. So just wanted you to see those differences of opinions and where they stand. So the first one would say, yes, it is covering, and she can actually pray with that because it's covering. The second opinion said, well, it wouldn't be considered as covering until and unless I'm not capable of identifying the details of what is being covered. If I can identify the details of what is being covered, according to the second opinion, then in that situation, that's not covering yet. It's partial covering. All right. So did I answer that question?
Yes, Jazakallah khair.
The question is, when there are differences of opinions between scholars, whether on niqab or whether I can pray with my yoga pants or not, what should I do? There's a general قاعدة فقهية, there's a general Islamic in a legal maxim. It is simply this: الخروج من الخلاف أولى. What is al-khuruj? Al-khuruj, this is not talking about going to the bathroom. This is talking about al-khuruj, meaning exiting and going out of the differences of opinions is basically a priority for us. What does that mean? Going out of the differences? I mean, they had the differences. I didn't want to be involved. They just had the differences. I just wanted a simple answer. I'm not trying to expand their differences. I recognize my limitations, okay? But in this situation, we would say al-khuruj min al-khilafi awla, meaning stay on the safe side. Whenever there are differences of opinions, for example, you know that there are differences of opinions whether your salah is valid by if you were to pray with your yoga pants. Well, al-khuruj min al-khilafi awla. Staying away from the differences of opinions and sticking to the opinion that all would agree on is basically best. So meaning what? Sticking to the opinion and perhaps wearing a skirt over your yoga pants just to make sure that you're not doing something that is impermissible, or is it something that would invalidate your prayer, would basically be best. Okay, just wanted to mention that one. Okay, any other questions?
And you wouldn't, I mean, you wouldn't wear that like, I mean, Yani, it's something like inside us that why would we want to wear that? You know what I mean? While we're praying. You know what I mean? Subhanallah.
Mashallah, Noura. Mashallah, Noura. I love how, subhanallah, I don't know how to explain it, but some people come with an inspiration that the light of Islam had basically empowered them to see the parameters of halal and haram. There is a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, "دع ما يريبك إلا ما لا يريب." If you are in doubt of something, just stay away from what you're in doubt of to what you're not in doubt of.
Mhm.
And not many people are capable of letting their fitrah help them with its purity, help them identify what is good and what is evil.
Yeah, we need
Because
to
of
go
the-
back to being like kids.
we need to, kids,
I
okay.
I mean, Yani, I don't know.
We
Okay.
need to go
Pure.
back. Exactly. We need to go back to purification. We need to go back to our tazkiyah. We need to go back to letting the resources that we got from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically shape and mold our vision, shape and mold our drives, shape and mold the purposes that we would like to basically head to. Jannah. The purpose that we want to go to, which is Jannah. Okay, اجتناب النجاسة. What is avoiding a najasa? Like how and what najasa are we talking about? So we definitely know when we're speaking about najasa, we're talking about impurities, urine, feces, all those different things that come out of the human body. Okay, whether we're speaking about a human body or whether we're speaking about other omnivore or other carnivore animals that would be najasa. And whether that was on the garment or whether that was on the spot, like on the floor or probably just any surface right there. Then in that situation, we cannot make salah on or on that area, within that area that basically had that najasa. Okay, so in najasa itself basically speaks about a certain amount. If this amount you're able to locate and you're seeing the effect of it, you're smelling it, etc., then in that situation, this is going to be an area that you could not pray in because it contains najasa. Other materialistic things that are considered najasa, relevant to prayer at least, are basically the dead. Okay. Number 2, blood. 3 is alcohol. 4 is urine. And 5 is basically feces. Okay. So what's the evidence? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ and وَالرُّجْزَ فَهْجُرْ. When the Prophet ﷺ was given the order, يَا أَيُّهَا الْمُدَّثِّرْ قُمْ فَأَنذِرْ, or the one that is muddathir and all bundled up with your garment, قُمْ فَأَنذِرْ, get up and warn. Why? وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ, and purify your clothes. Now here are a couple of things. When we're speaking about, we all know that we're supposed to be cleaning all the different things that surround us in salah, whether it's our garment or whether it's a place. But certainly, there are certain evidences in the Quran and Sunnah that show us that there is a special emphasis on other things and not others. Let's say, number 1, the Prophet ﷺ had given a special emphasis on urine, and that we should avoid that in all ways, and that it should be even away from the areas that we would be using, whether we're speaking about public or whether we're speaking about private. So in other words, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Istanzihu min al-bawl, fa inna 'ammat 'adhab al-qabri min." Avoid and clean yourself from urine, for most of the torments of hellfire are coming from it. Now, one thing is istanzihu min al-bawl. This is more related to men than women. Okay. Because of course the different anatomy, it takes time to completely empty the bladder compared to women. Okay. Now it's important. This does not mean whatsoever. This doesn't mean whatsoever that it's okay to rush for women, but give yourself some time. Cleanse yourself from the different urine discharge, and whether it's cleansing yourself from, meaning your actual body, or whether it's cleansing yourself, meaning your clothes themselves don't contain any smell. And of course, whether it's a smell or whether it's the discoloration, that's how you would know that there is the remains of urine on that area or that place. Now, a very common question that people would ask, at least here in Malaysia, we would get people, of course, because they would use the squat bathrooms, and the squat bathrooms, certainly when you're using it, there's going to be some splashing. Okay. Sorry, people. I know it's disgusting, but I still have to say it. And believe it or not, we see, for example, in Malaysia, you can see way more squat bathrooms than toilets. I don't know why people prefer using squat bathrooms. I was told it's healthier, but you really need.
Not when you're pregnant and almost fall.
Exactly. And you really need good, thigh muscles and glutes. They call them glutes, or do they call them the hamstrings and all those at the end? You really need to work on those before you would actually try. Okay. But in the end, just wanted to note that some splashing, okay, is basically falling within what is called umum al-balwa. Let me write that down. Umum al-balwa. What does that mean? So umum al-balwa, when something is, let's say, something is going to happen, no matter how keen on avoiding that, no matter how keen you were in avoiding that, it's deemed to happen. There's no way. Okay, so that's umum al-balwa. Umum al-balwa, some, let's say, small particles, probably from urine, is definitely going to splash. You don't have to worry about these little small droplets. Okay, Just give yourself some time, clean yourself, certainly, okay? But these little droplets, you won't be held accountable for them, especially for those that might have OCD and paranoia. This comes in to let you know that these things, you don't have to worry about them, and you don't have to, oh, what if a bigger drop? What if a bigger splash, etc.? Don't worry about it. This is umum al-balwa. What does the wording actually mean? The word umum actually means that when something it's a general thing. Al-balwa, it's a general effect, it's a general harm, it's a general thing that you cannot avoid. Okay, same thing. For example, when we're speaking about mothers, maybe their baby's having acid reflux, she's going to the masjid, but then this baby has an acid reflux and keeps on burping on her, and having all that burping on her, and she's like, oh, she's a really clean woman, but then she goes into the masjid. In fact, she's just carrying her baby, and the baby, wow, and here it is. Oh, great. You just wore your beautiful hijab right there, and right there just burped on you, and it's not something that you could avoid. This is umum al-balwa. Okay, it's pure, it's clean. Don't worry about it. Certainly, you can use your baby wipes to wipe it off, and that's basically it. You don't have to worry about all those particles. So that's umum al-balwa. It's not something that you could easily avoid. It's umum al-balwa. Okay, but certainly when we're speaking about urine, baby boy's urine is probably even that area that the Prophet ﷺ, I think we talked about that before, that the Prophet ﷺ had mentioned that you could, if the boy was not taking solids, okay, not taking solids, that you could just splash on that urine, basically just sprinkle some water on it and just pray on it, okay? Versus when it's girls' urine, even though it's just a note, some scholars actually said this includes girls' urine too, but majority of scholars actually said it doesn't include girls' urine. Okay, just a note, okay? And it's not an issue of misogyny. We mentioned that one. Okay, so what about if, let's say, you didn't know that there was najasa, that you didn't know that there was some kind of an impurity on your garment, and what you were doing, you were praying. If you're in salah and you're seeing this big spot of, let's say, impurity on it, okay? Let's say you were changing your child's diapers and I don't know, something just basically coming, let's say you see a brown spot. Let's be straightforward. You see a brown spot and you're like, oh my God, that's so big. When did that happen? I didn't even see it. Okay, let's just say that happened. Then in that situation, if you're during salah, okay, then in that situation, you would have to leave salah and actually wash the area. Just the area. You don't have to take a shower. Just the area that you could see the spot, that you could see that there was some najasa on it. That's what you would want to clean. You don't have to take a shower. Okay. Do I have to redo my wudu? No, you don't have to redo the wudu. You just remove the najasa. Okay. Let's just assume you had already prayed. Okay. You had already prayed. You cleaned your baby's diapers during dhuhr. Okay. You prayed dhuhr, and then you prayed asr, and then you prayed maghrib. But is it until Isha that you noticed that there was najasa all along that time on your clothes? Are you going to redo those prayers that you had prayed with that najasa on it or not? Differences of opinions between scholars. Group A said you don't have to redo it. Why? Well, they said, well, you didn't know about it. So, what do you mean? So what if I didn't know about it? They said, we've got an evidence. Hold your horses. What is your evidence? They said, well, the Prophet ﷺ actually said, Inna Allah tajawaza li an ummati al-khata wal-nisyan wa ma stukrihu alayh. So here it is. This is by mistake. She didn't know about it. This is by khata. This is by mistake. She didn't know about it. And therefore, by mistake, she probably had this najasa that she didn't know about. And here she is. She is basically discovering that there was najasa. She wasn't really sure exactly when it happened, but the latest of, let's say, close contact with najasa was when she changed her baby's diapers. Okay? Or when she took him to the bathroom, potty training. Discovered that, oh, he was doing the wrong potty training in the wrong area. Okay? Then in that situation, the first opinion said you would not redo the salah. The second opinion, they said you would redo all those salahs. Why? They said because you know that you know now that your salah did not contain a main prerequisite in a main condition for salah, which is tahara. So therefore, technically your prayer is not valid. And therefore, you would have to redo it. Okay? The first opinion said, well, no, wait a minute. You can't say that because the timing of it had passed and she didn't know about this. There was jahl, there was ignorance about it. She didn't know not about the ruling, but she didn't know that there was any najasa on her garment. And the time had passed and she prayed and the time had passed. So therefore, the first argument, and at least the first opinion, they said, well, since she was ignorant about it, then in that situation, she would be considered that she wasn't purposely praying without the conditions of the harram. Okay, so just a note on that one. Okay, so what are the other places that a person cannot pray in? Okay, let's see. The other place is the Prophet ﷺ had said in the hadith, Al-ardu kulluha masjid illa al-maqbaratu wal-hammam. Said
Sorry,
all,
Sister Aisha, Dr. Aisha, I just wanted to ask a question over there. So
go ahead.
this evening I was bathing my daughter and I already had wudu, but then I decided to change a diaper and then just wash her up. So in that
Okay.
situation, do I need to redo my wudu to pray? Even though I
Right.
did wash her
So
up, I watched the private
that's
area and all that.
right. That's another differences of opinions between scholars in touching the private area. The first opinion, they said just by touching
So
the private.
there was najas in the diapers as well.
Right. I'm going to talk about it. So the first opinion, we're not just talking about touching the najasa, but we're also talking about touching the actual baby's bottom. Okay. The first opinion said, well, just by touching the awra, whether it's a baby or an adult, that nullifies your wudu on the spot. The second opinion, they said, no, that would nullify if the person had touched that area with lust. Okay, wait a minute, what's your evidence? What do you mean with lust? Well, remember, there's a hadith that says when the Sahabi asked him if they were to touch their private part, basically to maybe probably wear their undergarment or probably change the baby's diapers. And the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّمَا هُوَ بُضْعَةٌ مِنْكَ. It's just part of your body. So it's like touching your hand, touching your face. That doesn't necessarily mean that that particular organ is najas just because it's the area that discharges in najasa. That's the second opinion. The second opinion said, no, you don't change, you don't redo your wudu just because you had changed your baby's diapers, not for touching the awra and not for touching the impurity. They just said, if you're touching the impurity, you just wash your hands, but not necessarily redo the whole wudu. What is the preponderant? Wallahu alam, the second opinion. The first opinion, they said, you touch the awra, and the Prophet ﷺ had ordered that you would wash your hands from touching the awra. You touch the awra right there, and it didn't specify. They said, well, the text didn't specify whether it's a baby or an adult, or whether it's yourself, or whether it's someone else's. You just touch the awra. It didn't specify. So they basically looked at it as a general text. Did I answer the question?
Oh, yes.
Can I
Okay.
ask one, please?
Go ahead.
Okay, Shaykha. So if the Sahaba at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they have everything cleared. Any question, they have an answer. Why we have after his time a different opinion?
Why there were differences of opinions after
Yeah,
his time? Is that
of
what you're saying?
Fuqaha.
Okay, fair enough. Number one is that during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, okay, yes, certainly they had the Prophet ﷺ that they can go to. The later generations, when they had differences of opinions, number one is that you had some ambiguity within the text itself. Just like, for example, when we talked about فَلَا تَخْضَعْنَ بِالْقَوْلِ. Okay, what is الخضوع? Is it to speak in a flirtatious manner? Or is it الخضوع to go in details? Or فَيَطْمَعَ الَّذِي فِي قَلْبِهِ مَرَضٌ وَقُلْنَا قَوْلًا مَعْرُوفًا. How much is قول معروف? What is القول المعروف? Is a woman's voice aura? Is it not aura? Does that make it aura if she would do a certain thing? Okay, so then you would have some wordings themselves can contain some ambiguity. Number two, some letters, even in اللغة العربية, can have some ambiguity. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا قمتم إلى الصلاة فاغسلوا وجوهكم وأيديكم إلى المرافق وامسحوا برؤوسكم. Okay, does that mean I have to do it in order, the wudu? Or does that mean فامسحوا بوجوهكم what is that? No, فاغسلوا بوجوهكم وأيديكم إلى المرافق وامسحوا برؤوسكم وأرجلكم إلى الكعبين. Okay, does that mean that the ayah was stating it in that way in order to tell me that this is the order I want you to do it in? Or does the letter wa just mean a general addition and not necessarily a specific order? Okay, so you could see the ambiguity sometimes in words, the ambiguity sometimes in the actual prepositions, and sometimes the text itself, whether hadith or Quran, they can have differences of opinions on the context that this text was revealed in. Whether we're speaking about context, meaning which one comes first and which one comes after, meaning the chronology of it, or sometimes having differences of opinions on the context of it, what happened, what resulted in this, and therefore trying to make a sense of the text and the context. Is it specific to a person, a certain person? Is it specific to a certain situation? Is it specific to certain details? And then they'll have differences of opinions. Okay, those are some of the reasons, not all the reasons. Later, of course, I would say the differences of opinions would also add on to it. The hadith, for example, how authentic is it? And when we're speaking about authenticity, we're also talking about, yep,
You need to repeat?
we're also talking about the text itself. When we're speaking about the authenticity, we're then talking about, well, an authentic interpretation. How accurate is such interpretation based on the context, based on the Arabic language, based on the Arabic grammar, based on the chronology that we would know of, and then they would have different interpretations. Did I answer that question?
Yes, so we can say that because of the Islam that spread that wide, for that we go through different culture, different situation, for that the different opinion or madhahib.
Right. I would say understanding the madhahib comes with maturity in studying fiqh. When somebody is well versed in studying Islamic law, they'll recognize the parameters and they'll recognize those areas, they'll be mature. You know, their vision would expand to understand that you can't be narrow in interpreting the text in a certain way or a specific madhab, and consider that, you know, those different madhab, they also had a good foundation in the principles of fiqh, or even in the fiqh itself, and that not to be fanatic about one interpretation. And I would say the more person is well versed in fiqh, the more mature they are in fiqh, the more educated they are in fiqh, the better understanding they have in understanding the text and understanding the right interpretation. And at the same time, it's also protecting them from the different misconceptions that are becoming trending, the trend right now, through social media or whatever. In order to protect yourself from misconceptions and also your own biases, that's why studying fiqh is important.
So اختلاف أمتي رحمة, not hadith.
No, absolutely not. It's not a hadith.
Good. Jazakallah khair.
Yeah. So let's see, the sister saying, my mom always taught us that we have to have a separate clothing for salah for daily chores. This avoids being doubtful of purity. I would disagree with that, because if you see the Prophet ﷺ's practice, they didn't have a specific garment just for salah, and I would say that that's going to enhance paranoia. Because if you were to look at the Sahaba, they prayed with their own clothes. So you don't have to have your own, prayer clothes in order to say, oh, the other stuff, maybe it had najasa on them. Because al-asl fil ashya' al-tahara. The general default ruling is that everything is supposed to be pure unless proven otherwise. Everything
Can
is
you write that down?
Okay, sure.
Sorry.
الأصل في الأشياء الطهارة. Everything is supposed to be, like, the default rule is that الأصل في الأشياء الطهارة. Everything is generally supposed to be considered, and we would rule it الأصل, sorry, في الأشياء الطهارة. We would generally rule that everything is pure unless proven otherwise. That's the general rule. But to assume and get into this paranoia, yeah, maybe it has a najasa on it, etc. Well, anyways, this is ma'fuwan an. This would be something that you would be dismissed. You don't have to be paranoid. Maybe it got into najasa. You didn't jump it into a pool of najasa. So you don't have to worry about it.
Sorry, Dr. Aisha, so that I'm pausing you there. I actually have a question, but I just wanted to touch on what you just mentioned. My husband is extremely particular. I would say he has OCD on purity, and he would literally spend ages in the washroom trying to the pee splashed, spleeched, or sploshed, like whatever. So I have to deal with that every day. And the only reason why I agree with what you just said is it would say, when I want to pray, why are you using the same clothes to pray? Like, you just went out. What if you've stepped on dog poo? What if your clothes have already swept cat's pee? Or I was like, calm down. Like, purity. So I've always thought of a way to explain to him, like, you don't have to be that extreme. Like, you don't have to be that particular about you being unclean.
Absolutely.
Because it creates
Like I
more
said,
chaos for yourself.
Right, absolutely. Even if, let's say, they were using squat bathrooms or public bathrooms, etc., and let's just say some drops and splashes of pee, like you had said, or urine, basically splashed onto the garment. This is umum al-balwa. This is something that is deemed to happen. This is probably inevitable. That is going to happen one way or another. You won't be held accountable for it. Okay, you won't be accountable for it. This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dismissing you. Okay, and al-asl fil ashya' al-tahara, everything is supposed to be clean, and if you had done wudu once, it would be a bid'ah to do it again. Okay, and if your garment is pure, it would be a bid'ah to change it. Oh, maybe this, maybe that. This is a paranoia. This is part of waswas, and definitely it's a bid'ah. But is it a bid'ah to have, let's say, of course, as women, at home, we're not wearing our hijab, we're just dressed in our normal, I guess, clothes without our hijab, but then we would have a special garment for salah. In other words, it's like let's call it a hijab at home, and that we would use probably a skirt and, the long covering that covers the arms and covers the head, etc., as a hijab. So that would be permissible. That's not a bid'ah. It's just designating a certain attire of hijab designated for salah. That's not a bid'ah. Okay. But thinking, and I see it here very often, women would be wearing their, hijab, literally, like beautiful Malaysian clothes. And it's proper. But then they would take it off and actually wear a different attire for salah. They don't need to do that. They don't need to do that. But of course, I can't every single time I go to the masjid and say, yeah, you don't need to do that, and start lecturing about things. I'll just stay quiet about it, and hey, if they're comfortable with it, okay. But in general, you don't need to do that. Your clothes, al-asl fil ashya' at-tahara, everything is supposed to be pure, even if you work on the street. In fact, the Prophet ﷺ had said that if you were to walk on the street, we're not talking about asphalt, but we're talking about grass, we're talking about lawn, we're talking about generally speaking. The Prophet ﷺ had said even that it was murad, basically, the extra, clothes, the garments that are basically dragging some dirt, probably at the end of their attire, especially for women. The Prophet ﷺ said, oh, don't worry about it. The rest of that area will clean it off. In other words, purify it. And that's the same thing. So even if your shoes, you're walking with your shoes, probably on the lawn, perhaps there were some dog droppings, but you're not going to live with this assumption every single time, unless you're seeing dog droppings on your shoes. Then you could just rub it against the asphalt, or against the ground, or against the lawn, or whatever, in order to remove the impurity. But in general, you're going to come with the assumption, with the general default ruling, al-asl fil ashya' at-tahara. Everything is supposed to be considered pure unless proven otherwise. That's the default rule.
Thank you, Dr. Aida. So yeah,
Allah
let me quickly ask my question, because I really do not want to forget. I'm sorry
Yeah.
about cutting you off. So my question is regarding prayer. So say when we want to pray, it's recommended that, especially when we want to pray the Maghrib, Fajr, so we recite out loud. So sometimes when my baby is sleeping beside me and I do not want to wake her, so I tend to reduce my voice. I've always wanted to ask if that is permissible to do or not. Do you have to maintain a certain tone decibel, or is it okay to read gently, just so you do not disturb
The tone
the
decibel
baby?
is only to be loud if you're trying to have others hear it. Meaning, let's say you're in jama'ah. That's the only time when it's loud. And we don't mean loud, screaming loud, okay? We're meaning the decibel, if you're in a jama'ah and you are leading a jama'ah, a congregation, you're having others basically, your voice is audible enough for them to hear it, okay? But if you are alone, whether man or woman, you just read in a voice that is audible to you, not to other people. Even if it's a man. If, let's say, it's a man praying alone, he reads in an audible voice to himself, let's say reading Salat al-Isha or Salat al-Maghrib, an audible voice to him. Unless there's a jama'ah, the object of a loud voice is, in a situation of jama'ah, is that they could hear what you're saying. But if you're alone, Why are you reading out loud? It's just you audible for yourself. That's it. Is that clear, dear?
Thank you very much.
Okay, let's see. Sister is saying, what is the difference between dhanb and junah? So in technical terms, dhanb and junah, they both mean a sin, okay? But in the implication of it, a dhanb is looking at the sin carrying an implication that would drag and perhaps have its impact on you down the road. Il-junah is more of a transgression. You commit a sin, it's a transgression, and therefore looking at it from the point probably you needing to compensate for that. There's a certain transgression, meaning there's a certain looking at it from the implication, what compensation do you have to do in order to, whether it's an expiation or a compensation if we're talking about people. Let's see, for women, Ustada Alima, not Shaykha. Okay. You can call me Sister Aisha. I don't mind. Right. At the end, it's the ulama that basically, the ulama are the ones that would endorse somebody's ilm. You would get your degree from the scholars, from a university, from a scholar, from the shuyukh. They would be the ones to identify whether this person is qualified to be a alim, whether this person is qualified to be a PhD, whether this person is qualified to be a scholar, whether this is a talib ilm, whatever it is. That would be basically the endorsement that the ulama themselves would testify on the qualification of that person. And then the awam, or the general people, would basically take that endorsement from the scholars or from the scholars that had endorsed that person, whether endorsed their research or their ilm, etc. Okay, but can we call a woman ustaza? Certainly, we can call a woman ustaza. We can call her alima if she is. We can call her sheikha if she is. And there's no problem with calling sheikha. There's no problem with calling a woman a sheikha. In some cultures, the word sheikha ironically means dancer. And in some cultures, the word sheikha means a woman that is a witch. And in some cultures, the word sheikha basically means like a chieftain woman or the wife of a chieftain man. In some cultures, sheikha basically is equivalent to the sheikh, to meaning an older woman. And in some cultures, sheikha basically is to mean that she is a scholar equivalent to the sheikh, meaning a male scholar. Okay, so just wanted to just let you see, those different terminologies and how it's basically used. How about wearing shoes in the bathroom? So do you have to wear shoes in the bathroom? It depends, I would say, on the type of bathroom. If the najasa is going to be within a certain area, a certain spot, like the toilet, and you know that that's where it goes, then you don't have to wear shoes in the bathroom. But if you basically know that there's going to be a lot of splashing, there's going to be, let's say, expanding the area of najasa, then certainly wearing shoes in the bathroom and making a certain shoe just for the bathroom would also probably be a good idea. Especially if you have boys, probably be a good idea to have certain shoes just for the bathroom, but you don't have to necessarily do that if we're speaking about, keeping that najasa within specific area. Okay, so this is it. I hope I answered all the questions. We're still not done with this segment, but inshallah, we're answering the questions and keeping the class within at least the areas that relate to us as women and also relate to our ability to understand fiqh, inshallah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت. If there are any other questions, I would still be, inshallah, happy to answer them.